Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome to episode 56 of the podcast. And today I'm taking on a great quilting debate about quilt ownership. So basically, this is asking the question about having your quilt quilted for you, having the binding added, a hanging sleeve, basically having someone else's hands in the project. Does that change how it feels to you after it's done? And does that also change who owns the quilt in a little way too? So yeah, that is the debate I'm taking on today after our introduction. And just a little reminder, we have both an audio version of the podcast so you can listen while you quilt. You can also see the video version and see what I'm working on. So I am here on the couch this evening and I am working on my goddess embroidery. This is a cross stitch Mother Earth embroidery design that actually has been in progress since I was in 11th or 12th grade in high school. So yeah, long-term project. And so I finished all of the border that had been left undone for over, a decade and a half, something like that. I don't know how long it had been unfinished exactly, but quite a long time. And then I kind of took a break on it for a few months there. I was playing a lot of video games, to be completely honest. And then now I've gotten back to it because we've gotten back to watching Star Trek, and I decided to fill in the entire background of this piece with yellow thread. So it's kind of going from white to orange. It's going white, yellow, orange, and then fading right back out again, back to white. And I'm going to carry that throughout the border. So make sure to come and check out the show notes so you can see a picture of this embroidery and how much progress I've made. I'm really pleased with how it's coming along now that I started working on it again. It's amazing how much progress you will make on something when you are actually putting stitches in it actively, even for 10 minutes a day. It really can make a big difference and you can get a lot done. And you can, I think the real big thing is just seeing a little bit of progress, just a little bit of time and attention on a project every day. That really makes the biggest difference. So what else has been going on? Well, last week we did the treadle sewing machine episode, and I also announced that I am now selling sewing machines. We have the Eversewn machines on the site, and that has been really cool. It's been really interesting to hear from everybody about the machines, put up 4 videos just on, kind of covering the basics of how to, thread it, get a bobbin wound, how to start sewing, that kind of thing. And then I'm going to be digging into the extra feet. I will carry the extra feet that you need for quilting. I had someone comment, and ask a question, hey, this machine isn't set up well for quilting. I mean, it doesn't have a patchwork foot, it doesn't have a darning foot, it doesn't have a walking foot or a ruler foot or anything really that we need as quilters. And the simple fact of the matter is any entry-level machine, they don't usually come with those specialty feet. Most of the time, if you are buying a higher end machine and it comes with those feet, it's usually a quilting package, or that is a machine specifically geared to and sold to quilters intentionally for machine quilting. You might not even realize it, but that's how it's been kind of engineered and designed and planned from, the base level of marketing, basically. And the Eversewns are not that. They are definitely sewing machines meant for sewing, and we are then using them for quilting, and I think that they're great machines for that purpose. But you are going to need a few extra feet in order to get that started and get that going. And I've had a great time looking for and testing the best feet to go on it. And so basically, as a quilting business owner, I have resources. I have distributors that I order products from, and I've been able to go through those distributors and check out all of their feet and see what's available and what's compatible with this machine, and then test them out and see which one's the best one. Because, it seems to me like they'll come out with the design of a patchwork foot and it'll be okay. And then all of a sudden there's like 50 different versions of the exact same mold. So very clearly somebody molds something new and makes that new thing, and then it kind of gets hijacked by a whole lot of other people and they all come out with something similar. It's not really the best designed foot. So I've been really hunting down for that perfect patchwork foot that works exactly like the foot that I really love on the Bernina 1230, the machine that I have been sewing and piecing and quilting on for the last 2 years. So I have, kind of have set a high standard, a high bar on this. And, that's what I'm looking for. And I'm going to continue testing and playing and trying things out until I find the perfect foot. I'm pretty picky. And I really want it to be just as good. So that's what I'm aiming to do. I did hear from a few Bernina owners whenever I announced that I was switching machines. And it's really funny. I've heard this before from other dealers. I have a few friends that are dealers. They deal a couple different brands of machines, and they say, Bernina people are pretty particular, and I've seen that myself. I bought my first Bernina, I think that was around 2004, 2005. They are unique, wonderful machines. I've mostly owned the older, more vintage style, the ones in the 1980s. And there seems to be a certain, once you go Bernina, kind of you're not going to go with anything else. And I had a few comments along the lines of, this is the biggest mistake you've ever made, that kind of thing. And the simple fact of the matter is, it is a machine. That's all it is. It's only as good as the person using it, and only as good as the skill that you build to use it. But it is still just a machine. And I'm sorry, but in a lot of ways, when you're buying a Bernina, you're buying the brand. I'm not being critical of Berninas here. I do like them. I think they're great machines. I particularly love the older versions of Bernina machines. But I do think that you're also, you're spending a pretty hefty penny, and they are some of the most expensive for that brand name. And maybe that needs to be another great quilting debate. Because there's a lot into that. And I've had a few quilters, start up conversations in my groups and stuff on Facebook, and it's become kind of a heated thing about, using a brand name machine, using a big brand versus using, just something cheaper. And the simple fact of the matter is, everything is branded. Everything has a brand. Some brands are more respected and have a longer line than others. Singer, I have 2 Singer treadles, and they're amazing machines, and I've had such a ball taking the Singer 12 apart and having a great time with it. And I grew up sewing on a Singer, but the Singers that are being sold now, I'm not really all that interested in using those because they've gone the route of going too cheap, at least in my opinion. I'm probably, I'm going to get in so much trouble. A lot of people get really, really territorial about these machines and really, loyal. And I love that. That's great. But please keep in mind, a machine is just a machine, and that's okay. And I'm not being mean. I'm just sharing my opinion. So there we go. So I've had a good time playing with the machine and modifying the free motion quilting foot, and I hope that video will probably go up in the next day or so. So basically, did some free motion quilting and made this little hoop quilt and modified the foot on the video so that way you can see how to take a pretty simple, not very well designed free motion quilting foot, darning foot, how to break it, how to modify it, how to get it to the right height, and basically take control over that foot so you can do fabulous free motion quilting. So yeah, that was a really fun little free motion quilting project. Good way of testing the Eversewn machine and seeing how that worked out. And then also, I really love this really dense, intense free motion quilting. It's a lot of fun. I don't have a lot of time for it. So this is the way I'm gonna, kind of get my little urge to free motion quilt out on these little hoop quilts. This is probably 6 or 7 inches wide. And I spent a few hours quilting this, and that was all I needed. I don't need to make a whole big giant quilt this way, but I can get a lot of practice and skill in just this little hoop quilt, and that's plenty. So what else is going on? We have finished up our Prism Path baby quilt. So I've got both of them here. This is the black and rainbow version. So this is the one I was quilting in video. And this week we finished up the matrix design. That's the wiggly grid here in the background. And come and see a picture of this in the show notes. It is awesome. Just a beautiful rainbow colors with black background. And then I've also got the quilt that's in the book. And that is a rainbow with a cream background. And they're just such bright, cheerful baby quilts. And it was also a baby quilt along, meaning it was short and sweet in just 6 episodes and such a really fun skill building quilt. And you'll want to check out this post, leahday.com/prism6. And you'll want to check it out because I shared not just walking foot quilting, but I actually switched forms of quilting halfway through the video, and I switched to free motion quilting and showed just the difference in how you have to position the quilt, how you rotate it, just really digging into the differences between those types of machine quilting. Because I have been getting a lot of questions, which one is better? Which do I choose? And it really just is down to whatever I'm feeling like at the time. If I'm in a hurry, I'm probably going to go with free motion quilting because it is faster. You can move the quilt more fluidly. But if you're really wanting a very perfect result with very straight lines and sharp angles, anything like that, any kind of echoing, especially on a 1/2-inch scale or bigger, I usually use my walking foot for that. So it's really just one of those things that you just pick and choose with every project, and there's no right or wrong way of doing it. And I think the best thing is to play around with switching forms of quilting in the middle of a project, just like I did in this video, just to see how it feels differently. So I hope you'll come and check out that post at leahday.com/prism6. And then we also have a new walking foot quilting video. This week was how to quilt pinstripe ziggy. So it's zigzag lines, but spaced like we did pinstripes. So that's lines that are spaced closer together and then further apart. And I don't know what it is about this. I just really think that looks very elegant. It adds a formal touch to your quilt. There's something about even spacing. It draws your eye in. It just looks intentional, it adds that extra little bit of niceness to your quilt. I don't know what it is about it. Not all quilts need it, but it's nice to be able to pull that out. It's another design in your quilting toolbox more than anything else. So that is what I've been working on this week, in addition to a new quilt pattern. This is Eternal Love, and it is in perfect timing for Mother's Day. So this is a fusible applique project. The quilt pattern comes with full-size templates that you can print out. You can print it out on paper, or you can print it out directly onto your fusible web. And I like Light Steam-A-Seam 2. That is my favorite fusible web. It's slightly sticky, it really bonds well, and I have found even when I'm a little overzealous with my iron, which is kind of easy to do, it doesn't tend to dry out. Some glues that I have worked with, some fusible webs that I've worked with, tend to dry out and stop being sticky. They're alcohol-based glues, and if you hit them too long with your iron, they can dry out and not stick then. But I have found Light Steam-A-Seam 2 to be a really good choice, and that's what I use to put together this goddess quilt. So it's a mini goddess. It is definitely a wall hanging. She finishes at 20 by 25 inches, so pretty small. And you can come and find the downloadable quilt pattern at leahday.com/eternallove. And right now, this second, no, there are no videos on this quilt. But if you really want them, we might just do them. This is one of those things. We're kind of entering into the summertime, and things slow down a little bit, and I was talking to Josh about it, hey, should we do another quilt along, even a baby/mini quilt along like we did on Prism Path. And he was like, well, let's just ask everybody and see, So if you would like to see a goddess quilt along, and that would be fusible applique, that would be blanket stitching, that would be free motion quilting in a very beautifully appliqued quilt, which is sometimes a struggle that a lot of people really have a hard time with. If that is something that you would like to do, please let me know in the comments below, and we can definitely make some videos and quilt along together. So that is what I have been working on this week. Just a lot going on as usual. We are going into kind of the summer, slow down period. This is what happens in the summer. We all get busy, and then we all want to garden and be outside and enjoy this beautiful weather. I should add that I have been rebuilding my habit for blogging every day, and I haven't really mentioned this all that much. So yeah, I have been posting a blog post on freemotionproject.com. That's my blog, every day since April. And, and it has been a habit that I let slide in a lot of ways. And I looked back and realized I had not posted 30 blog posts in a month since 2014. That's pretty bad. And it's really not that hard to put something up every day. Whether, a lot of it is I have moved the tutorials all to leahday.com, so I'm no longer publishing any tutorials to the blog. I want them all on my website. They're just easier to link up. They're easier to find for me on leahday.com. And that's it's better to put them all in one place, basically. So the blog, I'm now, making sure that I link those up nicely on the blog so you can see whatever is new is going to be going up that day. And then I'm also sharing more personal stuff. I'm able to share what I'm working on. And if I shoot a pretty photo, share that, pretty photo. And one fun thing that I did was make a flowered hat over the weekend, and it was such a fun project. Here's a picture of it, you can see. So this is the kind of thing that I share on the blog. It's not, not really a tutorial, just something fun and silly that I made, and then went to a derby party, a Kentucky Derby party. Never been to a party like that ever before, and it was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed honestly making the hat more than anything, because it was a project. I had a deadline, I could be creative, and then at the party I felt really pretty because I'd bothered to make that special hat for that event. And then on Sunday I shared a post about my Singer 12, which I am scrubbing down, and I am planning on doing more of a kind of step-by-step tutorial for that machine whenever I kind of get to a better stopping point with it. And I'll kind of share a step-by-step of how I've refinished it. And maybe I should start taking notes on that now that I think about it, because, every day I work on it just a little bit, and that adds up over time, so that I might end up not having a really good documentation. I need to make sure I'm taking photos as I go. But yeah, I basically soaked it in apple cider vinegar for 2 days, and it was seriously bubbling. If you're ever wondering if apple cider vinegar, like how to get rust off something, fill up a bucket and stick it in apple cider vinegar. And of course, we never consider doing that with our modern day machines because of course they're all electronic. But this little Singer is 100% metal. There was no plastic back then, and there was no electricity back then. That's why it's a treadle. And I took it apart as best I could. There are still some parts on it that I couldn't take off at this time because they were rusted shut. They were rusted to be basically attached to the machine. Put it into apple cider vinegar and just left it. And I, came out to check it every once in a while, and that stuff was bubbling. Like the reaction with the vinegar was just bubbling away at that rust. And yes, if you're worried if I was trying to maintain that finish or decals, trust me, they've been long gone. I'm not trying to preserve the paint. I'm not trying to preserve any decals, anything like that. So pulled it out of the bucket on Sunday, and you can come and see the photos on the blog of James and I scrubbing it. Pulled him out of the house with me and said, it's a beautiful day. Let's scrub this machine down together. And so we both had toothbrushes and baking soda and water. And the baking soda neutralized the acid in the vinegar and stopped the reaction between the rust and the vinegar. So, and it also was a pretty good scrubbing agent too. So with toothbrushes and stuff, we just scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed at the rust until we got it off. And it was a long process. We probably scrubbed on that thing for 3 hours. And then as soon as, of course, it dried, the metal immediately started to oxidize again. So I went at it with, I was just freaking me out. Like, I don't want it to rust again. No more rust. So I basically coated the whole machine in sewing machine oil, and it soaked it up. So yeah, that was my adventure on Sunday, and I really hope that you'll come and check out the blog. I'm trying to post every single day. I might miss a day here and there, and then I'll double post the next day to catch back up again. Last month I only had to double post 4 times. This month I've already had to double post once. I'm trying not to do that. I am trying to be good about posting every single day, because really, when I think about it, you know, I'm not the world's biggest fan of social media, to be completely honest. You know, I just find some of like the news feeds and stuff, you know, Instagram's really nice because you can really pick and choose who you follow and follow positive people and see pretty things. Like, that's what Instagram is all about. Facebook, not so much. And, you know, so it's been, you know, it's been one of those things that I'm like, all right, I really want more pretty in my life. And sometimes, you know, if that means just sharing more pretty on the blog and telling more stories, then that is a good way of cultivating that. And then it's a good challenge for me every day to just think through that and like, what do I want to share? What's something positive and pretty to share? And that's been good too. I've really enjoyed that, and rebuilding that muscle. You know, all of our muscles can get lax, you know, if we don't exercise them enough. And my blogging muscle had got a little flabby. So yeah, I hope you'll come and check out the blog and see what's going on there. And so that's pretty much it for the news around the house this week. Don't forget to come and check out the Eternal Love quilt pattern, brand new digital download pattern you can find at leahday.com/eternallove. And don't forget to use the podcast coupon code podcast to save 10% on your order. And now it's time for the great quilting debate, all about quilt ownership. If you get help on your quilt, who does it belong to? Who gets credit for making that beautiful creation? Hello, my quilting friends. Welcome to this great quilting debate all about quilt ownership. So this is something that started 2 weeks ago with the podcast episode 54 that was all about quilt cheating. So I was asking the question, you know, what is cheating? How can we cheat on a quilt? And I got a lot of interesting comments on that. And it also opened up the question about ownership. Because ultimately, my answer to is this quilt cheating is there is no way you can cheat. You can have someone quilt your quilt for you. You can have someone do the binding for you. You can have someone piece the top for you so you can do the quilting. That's what I do a lot of times. My dad helps me out. He does a lot of the piecing for me so that way I can focus in on the thing I do best, and that is the quilting. You can also use cheater cloth fabric. It's there for a reason. It's pretty, it's easy to use, it's great stuff. So there is no way that you can cheat when it comes to making a quilt. But the one kind of, I don't know, I don't want to even consider it a downside, but just the kind of extra thing that comes along with it is a question about ownership. If you have someone else quilt your quilt for you, is that still completely yours? If you have someone bind it for you, is it still completely yours? You know, in the case of the quilts that my dad pieces for me, I really consider it a collaboration. This is a collaboration between Dad and I together. If I showed that quilt, I would absolutely give credit for Dad being the piecer or the maker of the top, and me being the quilter, the person that put the quilting design on the surface. Okay, so I got a lot of comments and I wanted to read a few of them to you for that post 2 weeks ago. So one of them was from Sandra H, and she said, no, cheating would mean that there are quilting rules and someone with power and the right to enforce them, and there are not. So I completely agree with Sandra. There is no one out there that's going to be like, you know, wielding the thunderbolts from the heavens and saying, oh, your quilt just doesn't count. That's cheating. You know, no one's going to be able to put that declaration on your quilt. I would say go back to the definition of a quilt. If you are showing, if you are competing, You have to have 3 layers with stitches running through all 3 layers. That is a requirement. If you do a pillowcase style binding where you stitch around the edge and flip it so the back looks really nice and neat, you have to put extra stitches through that back. Otherwise, it won't count as a quilt. Even if that's a brand new back, even if that adds a 4th layer to the quilt, it doesn't matter. It has to be stitches running through all the layers. A judge needs to look at the top and be able to see those stitches coming through on the back. That's how a quilt is judged. And so if we're going off of that for a definition of a quilt, then it makes it really easy to understand the whole cheating concept. And it's not even really necessarily cheating then, it's just simply you're doing something different. You're not making a quilt, you're making textile art. You're making a blanket. You're making something else that's just simply not called a quilt. So another comment, this was from Bonnie L, and she said, buying something, tearing off the label, and passing it off on your own, that's not only cheating, it's stealing. Completely agree with that. Thankfully, knock on wood, I have never had a quilt stolen, but I have had friends and I have met quilting teachers that have had that horrible experience. They've had blocks stolen, they've had quilts stolen, and it's awful. It's one of those things where it's like, I don't even understand where someone could be coming from. Like, I can't even possibly put myself in their shoes to know why they would be stealing a quilt from someone else, especially a show-winning, amazing, quilt like that. It just baffles me. It's one of those things that I kind of don't even compute it because I just can't understand the mentality of someone wanting to steal something like that from someone that's taken all of that effort to make something amazing. But that was a really, really good point. So, cheating is its own thing. And, and that's, I think, more of kind of a fear-based thing that we have had applied to quilts, and certainly a judgment-based thing that we've had applied to quilts based on, maybe we didn't hand piece and our mother-in-law did. I heard from a lot of people that had that issue, that basically, a woman learned how to quilt on a machine. Her mother-in-law took a look at it and basically said, that quilt is trash, or that quilt is junk. It's horrible to say that to somebody. But these are people's opinions, and I had to think about it. And based on the comments that kept coming up over and over again, and I really think there's a lot of pride that comes into this. If you really take the time to develop a skill like, a very slow skill like hand quilting, then that can come along with a certain level of pride. And pride is not a bad thing, but when wielded in excess, it can be bad. It can be then damaging because it puts a filter over your eyes, and that everything that is not that thing that you have built great skill with, everything else doesn't count or isn't as good. And I think that there's a little bit of judgment mixed in that too, and then maybe even a little bit of jealousy, because if you see your daughter-in-law getting away with machine quilting and making these gorgeous quilts and making them so much faster. And oh my gosh, how is she able to knock that out and make 3 baby quilts for her baby? And, mother-in-law was only able to make 1 baby quilt for her baby. I mean, I'm taking this analogy pretty far, but you know what I mean. There gets to be there's like a bad combination of pride and jealousy and resentment. And then maybe it's been a long time since someone was like, oh my gosh, that is such beautiful quilting that you've done. There's maybe a feeling of a lack of appreciation, and that's where that comes from. So if ever someone has been critical of your work and said something along the lines of, that quilt is cheating, maybe take a step back before you get offended, because I know that's instantaneous. I certainly would have a hard time feeling like that quilt is good enough once that comes out of somebody's mouth, it's really hard to go back from that. But I think take a step back and check in and remember to apply the question of, where is this person coming from and why are they saying that? Why is that coming out of their mouth? And the answer may very well be, and I think the answer always is, that is everything to do with her and that has nothing to do with me. That has everything to do with her pride and her feelings and her lack of appreciation and her lack of ability to finish things because it's so much slower to hand quilt than it is to machine quilt, something like that. There's just, I think, a lot more layers into it. And the reason why I'm kind of delving into this and following up on the whole cheating issue is because I think there's a lot of layers also in this quilt ownership thing. And I think this can get icky really quick. This is one of those things that can make people feel bad or just feel hesitant to mention. Like, oh, what will people think if they think I didn't finish this myself? Like, what will people think if they know I didn't bind it myself? What will people think if they know I didn't quilt it? It just kind of goes from there. And it's the whole what will people think thing. And it's an engine and it can just chug its way down a train and it leads you to nowhere, I promise you, because we can't control what other people think. Not a bit. We cannot control what the ladies at Quilt Guild and their opinion about your quilt. But what we can do is share our part in a quilt with happiness and an open heart. That's what we can do. We can rock the things that we rock. And if somebody is complimenting the quilting, of course, give credit where credit is due. So let's talk about ownership, as in, and really dig into a kind of, not necessarily, I guess I kind of would say the legal side of it, because quilt shows have started setting pretty clear rules on when a quilt is quilted professionally by a long armer, when it is a collaboration versus a single person working on it by themselves. I think quilt shows have really been good about setting that into different categories and messaging that also really well on the quilt show application form. So I'm going to say it straight. If you make a quilt and you have someone quilt it for you, that quilter deserves credit too. So it is no longer your quilt. It is a collaboration. So yes, having someone quilt your quilt for you does change the ownership. And here's the reason why. The piecing design or applique design or the quilt top design is one part of the puzzle. But a quilt top is not a quilt by the definition of a quilt based on quilt show rules. If you submitted just a quilt top, you would be DQ'd. You would be disqualified because it doesn't have 3 layers. It doesn't have stitches going through all those 3 layers. Therefore, it's not a quilt. So you have a quilt top. You have then handed it off to another person, another artist, another person that has a hand in design, another person that's going to look at your design but come up with something new to put on the surface. And that quilting design can stand alone by itself. It's called a whole cloth quilt. So let's say that quilter says, I really like that quilt, but I don't want to mess with the piecing. They could take that exact same design that they just quilted on top of your quilt and put it on a plain piece of fabric, and that would be their quilt all over again, their quilting design all over again, minus your piecing design. It's called a whole cloth. And that means that the quilting can stand alone by itself, which means that's its own design, that's its own thing. And so when you're making a quilt, you're combining those two things together. So really, piecing an applique, making the top is half the process. Quilting the quilt is the other half of the process. And when they come together, that is a collaboration. So when you make something and you have someone quilt it for you, you now have dual ownership. And this is where it gets icky because I think there's 2 sides. Number one, there's the side of quilters getting quilts quilted for them, and they don't necessarily want to give credit because, hey, they made that quilt top. They hand appliqued all of those pieces painstakingly for 5 years. They needle turned that. They pieced every tiny little piece. It's their quilt. Again, pride. It can be a little bit of a problem. It can run amok. The quilting design for someone with that mentality, that was just, securing the layers together. They might not be really seeing it as its own potential standalone thing. And so the issue comes in when a quilter has had a quilt quilted for them and they enter it into a show and they don't even consider giving credit. They don't even consider listing the long armor on the quilt show form. Basically, it's like, poof, that person disappeared, and those stitches must have just appeared there magically. And that's really, it's unfair. It's unfair, and it's also, it's shortchanging your quilt. It's giving yourself credit for something you didn't do, and that is wrong. It's also disrespecting the quilter that bothered to build the skill, to know what she's doing, and to really elevate your quilting. And this really comes into play in the most dramatic way at quilt shows. So if a long armer has built her skill and really knows custom quilting, that's what it's called whenever you have, a long armer really go into detail and do little designs in all different places. I call it section quilting, not as good a term, but custom quilting just refers to doing a customized job over the surface, no all over designs, looking at every little piece and trying to elevate that piecing or the applique to the highest potential so it really stands out, really shines, and then a few extra designs, tucked in here, hidden around, that's just in the quilting alone. That long armor took a lot of time and a lot of energy, probably just as much time and energy as you took to learn how to piece, to learn how to applique, to build those skills. And then she's also studied design. She's also taken time to look at your quilt and figure out the best possible way of quilting it. So yeah, she's done a lot of work. And to simply kind of say, yeah, I made this quilt, and not even consider to give credit, that's not good. That's really not good. And it can cause some major problems with friendship. And I got this comment from Eric O on YouTube. He said, "Hi Leah, interesting that you chose this as your topic." Now this was the comment on the cheating video. "Two quilters I know used to be best friends. I say used to because they are currently in a legal battle over a quilt where one pieced the quilt and the other quilted it on a long arm. That quilt won a ribbon and a small cash prize, but the long arm quilter got no credit for anything. The long arm quilter is suing the other person for half the prize money. Needless to say, they are no longer friends." So here's the other side of it. Long armers, you need to have a contract. This is a business. If you are charging someone to quilt your quilt, and that's actually a whole other thing. We should get into that too. If you're charging someone to quilt your quilt, then you are doing a service. A service comes with a contract. So like if you contract something on your house, I think my dad said anything over $600, if you have any kind of job on your house bigger than $600, your general contractor is required by law to give you an itemized list and a contract to sign about that work being done on your house. So consider that. I don't think even like $600 should be the threshold. I think any time you are going under a situation where someone has given you something and then you have a service to fulfill, having a contract worked out as to the future of that quilt and what happens down the road, I think that's a really good idea. I think it's just simply good business practices, and sure, there's a lot of long armers that, are kind of just getting into it, just getting started. And I hear that a lot from people, I'm just figuring this out as I go, I'm just learning, I'm just getting started. I don't care where you are in the process. Take it seriously. It takes 5 minutes to write up a contract in Word that simply says, I'm a long arm quilter. I would like credit. If you show a quilt, please reference me as your quilting designer and the quilter for your quilt, and then, right underneath, have the person, I have read and agreed to the terms, and have them sign it. It's that simple. You could have that go along with if you have looked at the quilt and the quilting design and you have said, okay, this is going to cost $300 to quilt it or $100 to quilt it, to have that price already written in there too. So you're signing the person is signing not just the budget of the quilt and they know how much it's going to cost, they also know what's expected of them. Because this problem, this lawsuit, could have come up from two different ways. It could have come up from the quilter thinking, oh, I paid for that. I paid for that, it's done. Therefore, I don't need to give credit. That was a service, I paid for it, so it's mine now. Because, it was a service I paid for. I mean, do I tell everyone, the guy who cuts my grass, do I tell everyone, yeah, Rodney does that? I mean, like every time someone comes over, if they compliment my grass, do I say, Rodney does that? I mean, I'm sure it can feel a little weird, and that might be where some of this confusion lies. There could be another side in this particular situation where if these two quilters were friends, maybe that long arm quilter did it for free, and quilted her friend's quilt for her for free. And then the lawsuit happened, the cash prize just kind of made money get involved. And that's the thing, there's a good saying, and that is, friends and business don't mix. And I have found that, time and time and time again, I've had to learn how to be very, very careful about that because it's the truth. Money, I would say it's more money in friendship doesn't work. And if you're a long arm quilter and you have friends that want quilts quilted for them, I think that they absolutely could use a contract to keep that whole situation a lot less icky and a lot more clear, And if someone's uncomfortable by that, they're not your customer, they're your friend. And that's okay. Keep them as a friend and don't quilt their quilts for them. You can say no. That comes into a whole other thing too. Okay, so I think I pretty much nailed this in the head as far as when you have a quilt quilted for you by a professional long arm quilter. And I think that this is pretty clear, especially based on quilt shows making it very, very easy to give credit to that long arm quilter. I gotta say, when I started quilting 10 years ago, this was not a thing at all. Long arms were just coming on the scene. They were brand new. Very few people were long arm quilters. So, you didn't have that on a quilt show form. It was not even something I was really even aware of or really understood until much later. But now, long arms and long arm quilters are a dominant part of this industry, and they're a major way how a lot of quilters get their quilts finished. And they're also a major way of how quilters win at quilt shows. That's a thing. A phenomenal quilting design can take a mediocre piece top. Sorry, I'm just going to say it. A mediocre pieced or appliqued quilt top. And the long armer can fix mistakes on the long arm and add a quilting design that's just knock your socks off amazing. And that can be what elevates the quilt and gets it that ribbon, particularly a Best Machine Quilting Award. Sorry, but that's pretty clear who won that award, I mean, if you're winning, best piecing or best workmanship, that's obviously leaning towards the piecing or the applique, that kind of thing. But if you're getting a Best Machine Quilting Award on a quilt, then that is absolutely the long armer that just won you that award. And yes, I do think that if you have a contract and you state in the contract that any cash prizes get split 50-50, I don't think that's unreasonable. I think that's a pretty good idea. Now, all of this is to be said, I don't long arm quilts for people. That is not something I do as a service. I like collaborating with people. I've done several different mini quilt collaborations, but I do not quilt quilts on a long arm professionally for others. So that is very much a whole service industry that I'm kind of looking at from the outside, and I'm just simply saying, if this is an issue and you're having, you're a long armer and you're putting quilts out there in the world and they're not getting credit, people are not listing you on their quilt show forums, they're winning cash prizes and you're not getting a piece of the money, I think you need to look at your contract. I think you need to message this a lot more clearly and be firm about what you expect, and that this is a business and you're taking it seriously, and that this is a big part of how you make a living. And I think anyone that doesn't respect that, again, isn't your customer. Okay, so now there's this whole other facet of quilting that's even more fascinating, and that is the little things like binding and putting a hanging sleeve on it, like the little finishing techniques and stuff. And these are really easy to overlook. If someone's doing this professionally, meaning that all they do all day is bind quilts, yeah, I think you might want to give them credit. If this is something where it's kind of a one-off and someone just says, oh yeah, I'll help you with that. I mean, the way I'm looking at it is if this is going to end up being a show-winning quilt, most likely you're going to be binding it yourself. I really feel like the whole, binding, extra finishing techniques, that kind of thing, most often the quilters that use that service are most likely just simply wanting it done fast and also wanting to say, I don't like binding, I don't want to do that, I don't want to make that, it's not a big deal to me. Now I've made quilts that have elaborate curved edges, bias binding, that the curved edges of the quilt are a significant focal feature of the quilt, that are a significant part of the design. And yeah, that's another situation where if it's a phenomenal thing and someone's adding a phenomenal touch to your quilt, give credit where credit is due. And particularly, if there are a lot of a lot of hands in the pie, this is another situation where, yes, I do think this becomes more of a collaboration and a lot less of it's your quilt, you take all the credit for it. Now, there's another kind of aspect of this too that gets into high-level professional designers. And this is a part of the industry that I feel like is really kind of hidden. And this is speaking for myself because I have Dad piece most of my quilts. So Dad works with Josh and I every day. He comes in, he washes fabric, starches presses, he cuts out pieces. If we're working on a quilt, like right now, we are working on our quilt along for next year, and Dad has been working on that, cutting out units, playing around with blocks even, I kind of like, I look up a block I'm interested in, I'm like, Dad, give that a try. And we have this kind of funky system that we work out that works really well for the two of us. At least on this project, has been going really well. And so, even on some of my other quilt-alongs, I have had Dad cut out the step outs. So, we might step out 3 steps of a block. He'll cut out all the pieces and get things to the next level. So if I need like 4 flying geese for a quilt pattern, for a block pattern, he'll piece like 3 of them. And then I'll come out here and piece the 4th on video, and then I'll have all the rest of them ready to go so I can really quickly move on to the next block layout. So clearly this is one of those things that's very individual. I mean, different quilters work with different people, but I'm not the only one doing this. Pretty much most of the designers that you see at Quilt Market, or the people that are going to Quilt Market, they have to come up with multiple quilts in a very, very short space of time. And I say very, emphasizing that because it is a very short space of time. And I'm just going to go off of the amount of time that I was allotted with Island Boutique with my fabric design that I did for them in 2016. So the fabric came in, I want to say, at the beginning of May, and I needed to have finished, bound, completely done quilts by the end of June and shipping off. And like, I would not see them again for months and months, if not years, okay, down the line. So I needed to have that quilt pattern written. I needed to have the quilt done, bound with a hanging sleeve, completely finished in about 2 months. And that's actually a long period of time in comparison to some of the fabric companies. They might give you 4 weeks or so to go from start to finish on quilts. It is crazy. It is completely crazy. And the only way quilters are able to do this, the only way designers are able to do this is if they have help. And so there is another kind of hidden, I really do consider it hidden part of the industry that is women that do the piecing. And I've met a couple of them, and it was really interesting. So a quilter I met, this was a couple years ago at a spring quilt market, and she said, yeah, I piece a lot of quilts for this show or this show, and I made a lot of those tops. Well, in that show, I watched the episodes, no one ever mentioned, and this was several years ago, and no one ever mentioned the piecer's name, So this is very hidden. No one is giving credit to those piecers, to the person basically in the background that made that top happen. I mean, granted, these are very simple traditional quilts that are being quilted for, a YouTube show, or they're being filmed, not even filmed. Sometimes they're just being turned into a top and hung once at Quilt Market, and that's it. Or they're just being pieced so that way they have a, quilted image for the front cover of the pattern. So there can be lots of different areas and avenues that this quilt could be used for, but typically the piecer and the creator of that quilt top is not getting credit. And oftentimes they are also the pattern tester. They are oftentimes working out those little behind the scenes details, and that fabric requirement needs to be bumped up a little bit, and that's just a little clunky wording. Here's what I would suggest. Sometimes they are also tweaking a pattern slightly. And most of the time this is contract labor, meaning it's, here's a quilt top, we need you to make it, here's a flat fee. And so that's definitely a contractual kind of situation. Most likely quilters go into it knowing they're not going to get credit for it. Just simply beyond the, yay, I saw my quilt at market, or yay, I saw that quilt that I made. It's another person's design, but that quilt that she made, in that show. So that's a little, I don't know. It's a little convoluted. You've got to admit, one person is designing, another person's making the top, probably a third person's going to quilt it. This is a quilt, really these quilts that end up at market and stuff, they usually don't end up going into shows because they're not, phenomenally made. They're made on a hurry. They're made to sell fabric. That's their point. That's their purpose. That's what market's all about, right? So most often these are quilts that get created, they get used at one market, and then that's it. So you could argue that it doesn't really matter. But in the spirit of giving credit where credit is due, technically that's still a collaboration, and there should still be credit for these designers and these people behind the scenes. And I'd like to see that message just a little bit more. And I'm certainly going to work on that. Whenever Dad has had his hands in something, it's like, I just want to say that, Dad right now is working on the block party for 2019, and he's doing an awesome job. And honestly, Dad is even designing it a little bit. And I am not sorry to say that. I do not have so much pride in my work that I cannot give credit where credit is due. And I can be completely frank with you to say that I don't have time to do it all. I wish I did. I really, really do. And I think most pattern designers wish they had more time to do every step of the puzzle, but we don't. I have to do the things that only I can do, and only I can shoot this podcast. I would love, love, love to see Josh do a podcast. I was talking to him about that the other day. I would love to see him carry the whole show and do it all by himself. That would be great. But yeah, I'd love to see Dad do the whole podcast too. That would be hilarious. My guys really aren't camera guys. And Dad actually even told me once, you're pretty, you need to be on camera, you're pretty, and his voice is kind of crackly. He said, you sound good too. So you needed to go and do all that stuff. Do I need to be piecing 50 half square triangles? Not if he can be doing it for me. And I think most designers reach this point, especially when they reach a higher level and they're making more money with pattern making, and they're working with fabric designs, and, and you have a limited amount of time. You have 4 to 6 weeks, maybe 6 to 8 weeks to crack out how many quilts. This takes time and planning and effort, and you cannot do it all yourself. So it's absolutely understandable to go get a piecer and go get some help, and go get a quilter and go get some help. But just simply, give credit where credit is due. And if someone else has pieced that quilt for you, reference it. If it goes in a book, reference it. Pieced, all it is, it's just a single line. Pieced by, Nancy Drew. Quilted by, Drew Nancy. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who gets, whose name is on the line. You're the designer. You came up with it. You created that quilt. You brought it into existence. It's okay if you didn't have your hands in every single piece of the puzzle. There was a time in my life where I felt that pressure to do it all, and I had to have control over everything. And I didn't get very much done. And I didn't really enjoy every step of the process. And most of that pressure came from, what will people think? What will people think if they don't think I'm Superwoman? What will people think if they don't see that I made every single quilt? What will people think if they don't think I pieced that myself? I'll be honest, I could not do Quilty Box. For 2 years, I have done a free pattern for Quilty Box. Get the box, pull it out, wash the fabrics, and design a pattern in about 3 days, film the videos, put it up. And in the past 2 months, I have not been able to do that. It's just been too crazy with Mally the Maker, trying to edit that and trying to blog daily. It's just been too much. But a major part of that was Dad. That was a major thing that he did, where I would shoot the video, then take it inside and have Dad piece the next step. Then I'd pull out those pieces, come back out, shoot the next step of the video, take it back in. He pieced the whole rest of the top. So the only way I was able to come out with a free pattern every single month was because I had someone behind the scenes piecing, pretty much doing the piecing for me. So then I could come out and shoot the tutorials to make it happen. And the only other way you could do that is to step it out, and that would take more time. And, it's just, it's one of those things you kind of have to make it, you have to figure it out and figure out what is your favorite thing to do, and also how do you make that work, So I hope this has been enlightening. I hope that you've learned something new about quilting in general and the quilting industry and kind of the behind the scenes of how things work. There is certainly a lot more to it. When you go to a quilt shop and you see a beautiful quilt pattern on the shelf, there's a lot more to it probably than just a person setting down, writing, designing a pattern. There's a whole lot more to that finished quilt image. And that's another thing. Sometimes we don't have a finished quilt. We might not even have the fabric yet. That's where sometimes we use a digital program, EQ7, EQ8, to get that image instead. So there's workarounds. There's ways around it. But I don't know anybody that can go from raw fabric to like 6 or 7 finished bound quilts, which is really what you need at Quilt Market, 5 or 6. I think I had 5 when I went to Quilt Market in 2016, and I was feeling a little bit like that wasn't enough, you know what I mean? So really 5 to 6 fully finished quilts, and some of these might need to be big. They might need to be queens, queen size quilt. Could you honestly be able to knock that out in 6 to 8 weeks? Not by yourself. It really takes a community. It takes multiple people. Let's just give credit where credit is due. I dedicated Explore Walking Foot Quilting with Leah Day. That was the book I wrote about walking foot quilting. I dedicated that to my dad because we worked on those quilts. It's 7 quilts included in the book. We worked on those quilts for over a year, and it would be like, okay, let's pull this out. Let's get, infinity knot quilted. And Dad would kind of plug away at it while I was shooting videos on something else. And then I'd come in and trade, and I'd take a quilt and go shoot some photos on it and stuff and hand him something else. And so it's like we were constantly, flipping from one quilt to another. We had so many piles of stuff piled up, and it felt overwhelming. But we gradually, chugged through it and got through all of that together. But I know that book would have taken at least another 6 months to a year if I hadn't had Dad working on it. And that's why I dedicated it to him. So I hope that you understand, there's a lot to this. And it is a collaboration. And that is not a bad thing. That does not make you less. If anything, it makes you more, because you can do more if you ask for help. You can do more of the thing that you want to do if you ask for help. Please do not be so prideful that you get stuck in a box of, I must do it all by myself, especially if you're a professional, especially if you want to go into quilting and you want to start try and make some money off of it, if you want to start making quilts to show, or you want to start making quilts to do patterns, you're going to have to move faster. And in order to move faster, you're going to have to figure out what piece of the puzzle you have to control that really makes it yours, and then kind of be able to let the rest of it go. So I'd love to hear what you think about this whole quilt ownership thing. And if you've heard any horror stories, especially about quilters that have had issues on either side, whether it is a long arm quilter not getting credit or a piecer, feeling like there was, almost too much control from the long armer. This is one of those balancing scales kind of thing. And, and it's something I think that we are all still trying to figure out. We're all still wrapping our brains around it because it is still very new, right? So I'd love to hear from you and your thoughts on quilt ownership. Have you had a quilt quilted for you? Have you had a quilt pieced for you? Do you regularly have things done like your quilt being bound for you, a hanging sleeve added, a name tag added, all those little things? And how do you feel about all of this? Does it change it for you? Now that I've really encouraged you to think of it as a collaboration, does it change it for you that you really know that you should be giving credit to all of these different people that are involved in the process? And if it does change it for you, is it a bad thing or is it a good thing? I think it makes the quilt more special and more amazing to have more hands in it, particularly when those hands are people that you love. So look at your family. If there's someone in your family like your mom or your grandmom or your dad or your granddad or a sister or a cousin, if there's someone in your family that could be trained to learn how to do a step of the project that you want to let go, and they are needing the work or interested in the work, consider training them on it. Dad and I were not able to do this in a day. He started working with us in 2014, and I would say it took a full year before we were really in a groove. And I was able to depend on his piecing to be solid every time and depend on his cutting to be solid. His cutting was really excellent from the very first day, but that's a skill, it's a skill that we build one step at a time. So think about this and really keep in mind that you don't have to do every step of the process. And that may just be what helps you continue to create beautiful quilts and make even more quilts and enjoy this craft so much more. So that's it for this episode. I look forward to hearing from you and hearing what you have to say about quilt ownership and this big issue. Don't forget, we have the new Eternal Love quilt pattern. I'm holding up the quilt again. Please come and check out a picture of this beautiful quilt. You can find this new pattern. It is a digital download. And yes, on this one, I did all the blanket stitching, but I do believe that Dad constructed the goddess body. Now this was, I'll be honest, this was over a year ago, so forgive me if I've forgotten. And this is one of those things. This is another reason why, hey, maybe some people aren't getting credit for the piecing and the construction because so much time can elapse over the length of it. I'm pretty sure on this one that Dad probably he fused and cut out all the pieces for me, and then he may have put together the goddess's body. So there you go, another collaboration here, and you can find the pattern available at leahday.com/eternallove. Come and check it out, download it, and make this beautiful quilt perfect for Mother's Day. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and that you're loving the Hello My Quilting Friends podcast. Leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. That really helps us out a lot. And of course, you can find all of the episodes that we've shared so far linked up together at leahday.com/podcast. Until next time, let's go quilt.